Hi everyone, can you hear me? Hi. Good afternoon and welcome to the closing plenary of the Winter Roundtable 2020. It's a pleasure to have you all here. I'm one of the co-coordinators. You might have seen me in registration over the past 2 days. It's a privilege always to be a part of this incredible experience, and I appreciate everyone who's come and made it such an incredible experience. So it is my pleasure to now introduce you all to all of our members of our closing panel discussion. This will focus on responsibility, burden, and accountability, reflections on relation mentorship in psychology and education. It includes several inspiring mentors, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about them before we get started. So first of all, Dr. Carmen Cruz, who is our keynote speaker this morning, serves as a mentor in her capacity as Associate Director and Director of Training at Texas Women's University Counseling and Psychological Services. Dr. Veronica Johnson, on the far side, Assistant Professor of Psychology, instructs courses in forensic mental health counseling at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. In her consultation work as well, she focuses on expanding diversity and inclusion in educational settings. And then we have Dr. Yuki Okubo, who is just to the left of Dr. Cruz. She is faculty at the Department of Psychology, Salisbury University, and she recently received a grant from APA, the Office of Ethnic Minority Affairs, on Comprehensive Professional Development Program for racial minority psychology undergraduate students of color, which is truly amazing. And then we have Dr. Riddhi Sandel, who is the Associate Professor of Psychology and the Program Coordinator of the EDM program here, and in psychological counseling at Teachers College, and she is also one of the directors of the Winter Roundtable Conference, so you might know her in that capacity as well. And then finally, in the center, we have Dr. Thomas Parham, who is the president of the California State University, Dominguez Hills. He has authored numerous books and journal articles focusing on his research efforts in the area of psychological negressions. So please join me in welcoming our plenary session speakers.
Good afternoon. Oh, come on, y'all. This is the last day of the roundtable. We languish in these seas of cultural sterility all year long. And then you come to the roundtable, which is like that one place you can come and just get like filled. And that's the best y'all can do. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We begin this last panel where we talk about reflections on mentoring. And know that as I start, and I get to be the facilitator, which is fun, I get to ask the questions. And then we're going to have some time for you as an audience to ask questions too. But there's several things. I think we've had the conversation about teaching to transform, which was the whole theme of the conference. 3 assumptions I make with that as we start our panel. 1, there is no greater blessing in life next to being a parent than being entrusted with the personal and intellectual growth and development of students. And so whether you are in a teaching role or a mentoring role, that becomes a very sacred obligation that is important for us to be able to nurture and cultivate and treat it in that way. I think also teaching at some point is not about helping you get the best job, nor is mentoring. It is about the cultivation of the human spirit and the human potential. Our job as mentors is to help students grow in ways that are important to them, not important to us. The last assumption I make is really about the transformative possibilities of the human spirit. Fundamentally, as I was talking with Dr. Mox and Raspberry today, that it's hard to be a healing presence in people's lives, which is oftentimes what healers are, and mentors are, and teachers are, if you lose the capacity to believe that people can elevate themselves to rightful places of rulership and mastery over their world. How do we do that? You can never lose the capacity to believe that people have the capability in each of them. If we cultivate that agency, cultivate that empowerment, and empower that spirit to be able to achieve what they do. That is what we will try to do. So this conference has embraced the theme of teaching to transform. which raises the question of what are your expectations for transforming those you mentor and supervise? I know the crowd just went, ooh, I know. We didn't got deep yet, right? What are your expectations, right? Because the conference was really, remember, talking about teaching to transform. What are your expectations about how those you mentor should be transformed? Let's start here, and we're just going down.
I got it. This might be a rerun for those of you who are here this morning for my keynote, but the first thought when you asked that question is my expectation's a really strong word. My hope / expectation is that slowly as trust builds within the supervisory relationship, that then the trainee, the person, can fully emerge authentically into the relationship and supervision, because I think then they're able to see more of their actual true self, which is inherently what we're trying to do in psychotherapy for most people. So it's that sense of like, can we not lead people to where we've been? That's a controversial conversation. But that's the first thing that comes to mind, is the parallel between what we are charging students to do and what they're wanting to do in their lives with clients and patients, and for them to be able to do that as well.
Beautiful. We're going to keep it moving. Yuki, what do you think?
So I teach undergraduate students. So, when we think about expectations, it's a little bit different for me, right? Because I don't know what they're going to do. Like, I hope that they'll become my colleagues and they'll be here, right? But I can't have that expectation. So what I would want then is their curiosity to ask questions when they don't know something, or to actually, if something resonates with them or kind of, gets to them, to kind of say like, wait a minute, and then just kind of have that curiosity to say, I don't know what that is that you just told me. Can you let me know?
Okay, ready?
I think for me, the expectation I have of my students is the expectation I have of myself. And I say this usually in the first day of every class that I have, that I'm going to come in prepared and give it 100%. And that's all I can expect from you, is that you come in prepared and give it 100%. And sometimes that 100% is really challenging and painful, and you don't want to do the work, but you can trust that I am going to do it with you, and that with time we can do it together. But I think give it your all would be in a nutshell.
What do you think?
I think for me, I sort of teach students at the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral level at this point, and so it looks a little bit differently with each of those groups, but ultimately I tripped over the word expectation because it feels so heavy to me, and so I've tried to work on my own self in terms of not expecting particular things from my students, but hopefully guiding them through a process of reaching their own sort of authentic self, whatever that means. Because I think it's very easy for me to sort of expect from my students what I would like to see them doing, right? Becoming my colleagues, being at the Winter Roundtable with me, but that's not always their expectation, right? And so helping to guide them along their journey with whatever they see them for themselves, their authentic self, I think is most important for me as a mentor.
It's interesting as you hear the theme already, that there's a tendency to want to be gentle and not impose, right? A mentor self on a student, and yet even inviting a student to find their authentic self is in and of itself an expectation, right? It is a hope, it is a dream, it is an aspiration. For me, I think I would answer that by saying that there's a piece of African wisdom I stylized in my writing years ago that says, it's a principle called ore-ire, O-R-I-I-R-E. It means one whose consciousness is aligned with one's destiny. That was actually the theme for my conference when I was president of the National Association of Black Psychologists. So if I have an expectation about transformation, it would be that students would be encouraged to find their sense of empowerment and agency, to align their consciousness with their destiny, to find out what are they passionate about within the work that we do. With that, let's move on. Somewhere I read that we should hold fast to dreams, for if they die, life is just a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Those verbal stylings of the great poet Langston Hughes remind us that as mentors, we are in the business of preventing wings from breaking and mending those wings that do break. So mentoring involves helping mentees fashion a dream that in some cases frame even some of the expectations, I think, for one's life trajectory. How do each of you help your mentees dream about life possibilities and potential? I'm looking at your end now.
Okay, it's me. Can you repeat the question one more time?
All right.
I thought it was on Carmen. Yeah.
That's all right. And we ain't going that way yet. We're going that way.
Okay.
If mentoring fundamentally is about trying to help your mentees fashion a dream, how do you help them dream about life's possibilities and potential?
I think I start with myself. So a lot of times in the classroom or sitting in my office with students, I'm often telling my own story, which feels a little odd at first and certainly is not something that most students are used to hearing on a regular basis. But I think some of the most powerful mentor experiences I have had is hearing about my mentor stories, hearing about their sort of failures and their triumphs and the things that they had to overcome to be where they want to be were really inspiring for me. And so when I sit with students, I'm often letting them know about my background, where I came from, the things that I had to overcome to be who I am today, and the things that I still sort of, still face on my, academic journey and so forth. And so I think just being myself and being my authentic self in front of students really enables them to say like, oh, you come from a similar background as me, or, oh, you've dealt with that as well, or, oh, you've dealt with these sorts of losses in your life. Students feel empowered to say, well, if you are able to do that, what then means that I also can do that? What means that I have to stop if I, encounter a roadblock in the way? And so for me, just being myself and telling my story to as many students as are willing to listen, I think is in and of itself a way of sort of helping them along their trajectory, not letting them let their dreams, fall away.
Okay, really?
Yeah.
How do you help your students dream?
I feel like I'm having such an Oprah moment. Like it feels so like global and big. I love it. Well, two things I'm going to say on this. One thing, I think sometimes mentorship, at least the way I received it prior to my clinical internship that I talked about, was through a very white frame, right? A very sort of removed frame where no one asked me questions about my life. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh, talk about your client work or talk about your academic work. But there was no piece of talk about yourself, right? I mean, I think how can you help someone dream until you have access to their story and their desire? Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes for a lot of psychologists and mental health workers and social workers and even teachers, we get a little paralyzed because we're like, oh, I don't want to cross a boundary. I don't want to cross a boundary by asking someone their personal story. But for me, I think how can you encourage a dream until you know where that dream came from, right? So even when you say, how do you help them dream, I first have to understand their world, to understand their conscious and their unconscious, to sort of foster the dream. And the second piece, I think sometimes we have to help our students dream. Sometimes we have to nurture the dream. We have to maybe repair a dream that's been broken. And I think sometimes we have to give them new dreams, right? And I think that's the other part of mentorship that sometimes mentors shy away from. Because given our experience, sometimes we can see that some of us have desires that might not be best aligned with our talents. And that's hard news to hear, and I think that's when you need a lot of courage. And I think that might be a simpler answer to how do you help your students dream, is to tap into all the courage that I have.
Let's go. You can. Let's shoot. Go for it. How do you help the students dream?
I think definitely personal stories. I do share that. I think removing obstacles where I can and providing opportunities. So sometimes they may not be able to dream if they have obstacles, like if they can't pay for graduate programs. Like why are we asking them to dream? Like that may not be possible. So if I have information that says, well, this program is free ride with stipend, or there, like you can get scholarships, you do X, Y, and Z, you do networking. If I can actually provide that information, which is free, by the way, right? Like if I found out about it, why not share it? And then maybe they can imagine, they can dream, what it is that is possible, because all of a sudden, like the obstacles are gone, and they might be able to start thinking, oh, that's a possibility.
Good. Carmen?
At the point that a student reaches me, they're in their last year of their doctoral program, they're on internship, right? So frequently I share with them, part of the reason I love my job is that I get to be there when their dream comes true, right? That's the piece, and I talk with them about this. It's like you've been in school since kindergarten probably, and now you're finishing your PsyD or PhD. And so it's our responsibility as a supervision team to socialize them into the truth of the profession for that setting. And so the dream has pieces of shattering, because every single setting is going to have its strengths and its positive aspects, and other settings are going to have the things that maybe you don't feel like you're thriving in certain moments. And so I take that responsibility very seriously, because when they're in the graduate program for 3 to 6 years, depending on the graduate program and the individual student, you see them in moments throughout, and then now they're supposed to come to this site and put everything together that they've learned through knowledge, skills, and awareness and all the things, and now go do it, and go do something different sometimes every hour. So I find that in the first 3 to 6 months, they're learning a different aspect of themselves that they haven't learned yet. Like some people have never had a full-time employment. Just how do you be an employee and answer to not only your supervisors, but to the institution, human resources. So there's that aspect of training that I feel is my responsibility too. And just socializing them into the truth of what it's like to be in that setting, and what aspects of themselves emerge so that their dream can continue to come true and still honor who they are. So that's what it makes me think about.
Within the context of reciprocal exchange, talking about reciprocity, what is the most profound lesson you as mentors have learned from your mentees as you seek to facilitate their own enlightenment and illumination? Let me start with Yuki.
What have I learned from mentees? Being humble. That I don't know everything, right? I can't possibly know everything. And we have this aspect of us that wants to know everything, right? When we're asked questions of like, of course I know. No, a lot of times I don't know. And I have to admit it. And I have to kind of go through that sort of like, oh, I don't know. And then I have to pick myself up and, figure out, doing my best. Like, yeah, I actually don't know. Let's figure it out together. That's a really humbling moment. It happens in the classroom quite a bit. It happens in individual meetings, research settings. Yeah.
Makes sense. What do you think? What's the most profound lesson really you've learned?
It's
from
so
your
interesting,
mentees?
with complete opposite of what just Yuki just said, that sometimes I know more than I thought I did. Which is absolutely
Who
true,
knew?
though. Who knew, right? And I think I'm sorry for it. Don't mean to sound facetious about it, but I think oftentimes being women of color, and we all identify as women of color, we've been sort of told that we don't know enough and that we can't have an impact on a student or a mentee in any other way apart from just like simple caretaking, right? Like sort of being their babysitter in a lot of ways because of our socialized racial and ethnic and gender identities. So when like students sometimes, and I think we sort of sell ourselves short, that actually I'm really smart. And, you know, I'm probably like, I have a lot to teach my students and learn with them. And I think it's also empowering for students to see that. Because we're also teaching them that don't sell yourself short. Don't go around the world. I think humility is really important. Like, I mean, for having self-confidence and being narcissistic, there's a small line between that, thin line. But I think it's also really important to own that power and say, I have power, and I'm very happy that we can sort of grow in this power together, and that when you leave, hopefully you will also recognize and affirm your own power.
We go this way. Spirit of reciprocity, most profound lesson your mentees teach you.
I think of bidirectionality and RCT. I talked about it this morning again in terms of mutual impact and supervisors being open to being impacted by their supervisees and supervisees being open. So I think if I had to really just capture it in one sentence, it would be about worth. And like, I am worthy, you know, and I am worthy of these connections that I did not experience in my personal life earlier on. And so I think it helped me develop into more of my power, my worth, by continuing to believe the feedback that I was being given versus rejecting from a very woman of color perspective of like, no, this is not me. I can't be this powerful. So I think it helped me feel more worthy.
Most profound lesson.
So before you spoke, I was going to say vulnerability. You know, whatever, because I've been socialized as a Black woman to be like, you know, in some ways a mammy and, you know, like sort of, you know, caretaking and, you know, fostering vulnerability in students and also being vulnerable with them. And that's something that I can do as well. But I also realized I'm in my third year at John Jay as an assistant professor on the tenure track, and my students would call me the CEO. They'd be like, yeah, the CEO. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what does that mean? And they're like, well, you get shit done. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I do. Like, that's also an aspect of the way that I operate that I think I often don't kind of stand in, because it sometimes feels like too much for people, right? Or it sometimes feels threatening for people. But I think one of the things that I've gotten from my students is that, like, it's okay to operate in that way. It's okay to get things done and be secure in that and secure in sort of my working style and holding people accountable. And that's not something threatening, and that my only value to my students is not my vulnerability, right? That I also come with a lot of skills and knowledge that I can impart on them. And so they've actually helped me cut through my own sort of imposter syndrome a lot, because, you know, getting feedback from them helps me feel like you do have a lot to offer your students and your colleagues and the people, you know, sort of in higher positions, you know, to you. And so it's not just those sort of more stereotypical traits, but it's also sort of these other things that I have as well. So thank you. It's my mentor right here. So one of my mentors right here. So still mentoring.
But what's fascinating to hear from the panelists thus far is how different the stories are, how different, right, some of the answers are and where they overlap. They converge and diverge around particular themes. But if you had to develop a model just on what you've heard about what mentoring is, look at the complexity that exists, right? Just in these few answers that we've been able to do. So as you think about there is this one best model to be able to embrace, there is no best way to do that. I'm reflecting in the moment about one of the greatest blessings in my life is being mentored by Joe White, the great Joe White. We've honored him here on this stage, in fact, at TC. And in that space, my own journey to mentorship began with taking a class, doing pretty well in this class. 2 months after class, I'm walking down a walkway at the University of California, Irvine, when I was an undergraduate student way back in the 70s. And here comes Dr. White. And as a respectful student would do, you kind of walk up in a very humble kind of space, and you assume the posture, and you just go, "Hey, Dr. White, how you doing?" just as a greeting. And he simply walked up to me and he put his arm around me. He said, "Young brother," he said, "you have too much talent and you are too brilliant to be running around here playing basketball, chasing women." True story. "Come follow me." And over the course of the next several weeks and months, he diagrammed my whole future upon a chalkboard, and that kind of began our relationship. I've had other folk that I've mentored who have seen me, playing in the gym or in a classroom teaching or, running a therapy group, and have said, "Dr. P, I'd like to have you for a mentor." So they have sought me out. So it suggests that there are multiple ways to be able to attract a mentor, right? For you, what are the ways in which, right, students most frequently seek you out, or you most frequently seek them out to be mentors? And by students there, I'm talking about somebody who is just interested in learning. Because some of the folk we all mentor are sometimes older than us, are sometimes younger than us, are sometimes people we don't know, but they are intellectual mentors. I was intellectually mentored by the Daryl Sues of the world before I even knew Daryl. And he's a brother from another mother from me now. But back then, we were just impressed with his scholarship and the depth, right, and clarity of his intellectual narratives. So we were mentored through his writing, even though we hadn't met him yet. There are a lot of different ways. How do you connect with people, right? And what's the best way that happens for you, really? How do you connect with mentoring students? Do you choose them? Do they choose you?
How did you choose me, Veronica? I mean, I can answer my question, but I can say how I chose Carmen. I was only allowed to work with Carmen for one semester, and then I went to the director of the agency, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to work with her for 2 semesters, so make it happen," right? I chose Carmen. I think this kind of answers your question. It's nice that I have actually real life experiences on stage, because I felt that I could see myself in her. It felt like someone I wanted to become, but who wasn't so far away from where I was right now, if that sort of makes sense. I saw aspects of my personality, and I was like, "Oh, I would like to take this aspect of my directness and make it like that," and sort of learn from that. So I sort of really fought and chose her in that. I think it's very important for me to have mentors with whom I can share some aspect of identity, and that sort of allowed me. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, Veronica, but I think my students choose me because I kind of keep it real, I don't mince my words. I feel I'm compassionate, and I think that's what I always tell people, that you can be direct and compassionate, that can coexist. But I don't let you hide, and I think some students don't like that, and they don't choose me, right? I mean, rightfully so. And some students like that. It sort of provides you this accountability, hopefully without it coming from a place where they're feeling fearful, right?
So do most of them seek you out, or you seek them out?
I mean, I have 200 students in the master's program. I'm not seeking anyone out. I'll keep it real.
So interesting, even as I would argue that whether you have 10 students or 500, not all of them will have that mentor-mentee relationship. That's a special bond that you enjoy. Let me go to this end. How do you most connect with the people that you mentor?
I feel like it's, I don't have 200 students, obviously. Smaller training program that I manage. And so they're built in every year. There are 7 new students, there's 3 pre-doc interns, 4 practicum therapists. And I feel, when I've been reflecting on this question, and it's an organic, I would even say spiritual movement toward, non-religious, just 2 spirits. I mean, if you read existential theory, Rollo May, we used to be able to say spirit in psychology. And we are spirits connecting humans at the end of the day, regardless of all the identities, because the both and of identity and multiculturalism is that it's a both and again. It's like the identities are so core and important. At the same time, there are moments that transcend into humanity. So I think that there's a humanity and connection that happens organically and at times spiritually. Even in some interviews, I have a 2.5-hour process to my interview for internship, and I do a one-on-one 25-minute time with each potential candidate. And there are moments there, that connection, mostly they happen, to be honest, with women of color. And I got an email from one that said recently, I can't believe I found a mentor in a 25-minute interview. So because we had such a true just person to person, she's a Black identified woman, and it was just such an incredible connection in such a short period of time. So for me, it's organic and spiritual, and the ones that gravitate, like Riddy. And yeah, she requested to meet with the training committee and the director to put forth, because usually we have everybody switch. And so since Riddy, we actually have a new policy.
Well, what about you?
So, I work, like I said, I work with undergraduate, master's, and doctoral students. What I found, I don't know who's telling them this, but the undergraduates are being told at some point to find a mentor, but they don't actually know what that means. So often at the beginning of the semester, I'll have 5 students, typically women of color, who show up in my office, and they're like, hi, I want to meet with you. So I'm like, come on in. And they're like, so will you be my mentor? And I'm like, mentor what exactly, right? And so there's this sort of teaching moment, right, where they're looking for mentors. They don't know what that means, and then I have the opportunity to explain to them what mentorship can look like, which is, I feel, really fun to do with students. They know that they need to know professors, they know that they need to connect with them, but they don't know what around, and so our conversations start off being very casual about what their story is, to the degree that they're willing to tell me, and what happens is that some of them sort of latch onto that, right? And some of them find that really fitting for them, and some of them I never see again, right? But the beauty in it is that, right, there's some shared connection that happens in that moment that I can't describe in a word. But students typically will find me in that way. Just, I know that I need a mentor, but not really knowing what that means, and I have the opportunity to teach them that. And how I found mentors, I think, typically is, it's usually someone who does share at least an identity with me, but also someone who has something that I want to develop, really. It's a very selfish process in my mind. And so with Riddy, it was like, she's so direct. How, in a like beautiful way, right? And so how do I like find my voice in the way that she's found her voice? It was always very fascinating to me to sit with another woman of color and have you not be apologetic about that aspect, right? So I've always been I'm a very direct person, but always been very apologetic about it. And so it was really impressive to me to find somebody, I'm like, yes, that's a skill that I need to develop, right? And so selfishly, right, I sort of latched onto you for that, and then of course got so much more out of the relationship than even just, sort of that. But that's how they find me and I find them.
Mm-hmm.
So when I graduated from master's program, I was in desperate need of finding a mentor that looked like me. Mm-hmm. And that was like the first time that talk about not being apologetic about my needs. Like I need to find someone who looks like me, mentor. And this place provided me that. So that was sort of, like sometimes how I seek, and like being non-apologetic about what our needs are, and also to know that it may not be one person, that it could be multiple people that is fulfilling your needs. And it's cultivating relationships, right? And it's a very intense relationship, and it has a lot of different components to it, but it doesn't have to be one person that fulfills that. So there's that. With students, I think it's different with every single one of them. Some of them are in this audience, and they can probably tell a number of different stories. Sometimes I shoulder tap for a reason. I think we all need it, And I have like white colleagues that kind of say like, no, I don't do that. I have students come to me, and that feels very elitist, privileged way of asking students to perform before they're not even your students, right? So like, why not invite them? Like, I want to work with you. Like, I actually chased after one student. We're like, are you still interested in working with me? Like, are you putting an application in? And I was like, oh, when does it due? Like, give it to me ASAP. Like, you know, and he did, right? And I think that's important.
Yeah, part of what I like about that posture of mentors seeking out students is that, in the same way, in fact, that I talked about that relationship between me and Dr. White, is that mentors can oftentimes see things in students that they can't quite see in themselves yet. And, you know, there's an element of that I think that's important, but it also helps to balance out what people now refer to as the power differential, but just the energy, because it somehow normalizes and humanizes that individual. Because what they know about us as mentors is simply the packaging and the reputations that have been built and the classes you teach and what you write, but not who you are, you know, in terms of the authenticity. So speaking of authenticity, so I'm gonna run through this question real quick, try to free associate a little bit, and then because point values are double now, so we gotta go to the audience in a minute. What is the biggest misconception, given all the packaging? I'm talking about your degrees, where you got them from, what you published, what you've been doing, all the resume stuff they read about us when we get introduced. Because all that does is put distance between ourselves and those who we could potentially mentor. What's the biggest misconception that people have about you as a professional and a mentor? Let me go here. She's like, you calling on me first again?
With that, you know what's really interesting is I added that question to my internship interview this year, and my one-on-one with potential.
Yeah, you right there.
Did. Oh,
Biggest misconception.
that I can handle everything, that I could do anything. I think that you reach a certain place and people have a particular view of who you are and what you can do, and I do a lot. I can do a lot, but not always, you know. And the personal stressors that, you know, we all hold so much, we carry so much personally at times, and then the peaks and valleys of that impact, I think, how people perceive me and my strength.
So the power you possess. Okay, let's keep going. Yuki, what's the biggest misconception people have?
That I'm quiet. Goes with the Asian women stereotype. And I'm so not, for those of you who know me knows this, like, I'm not even close to it. And I think that really rubs people the wrong way, you know? And it just kind of surprises me, because like I think I know how I am, so, you know, like I'm what? But I've gotten that feedback, especially in like professional settings when like they're just getting to know me, and I think this stereotype is like larger than myself or something, and then it's like, how does that happen? But I think, you know, yeah.
And the important piece about those two elements is that, for one, I'm more powerful, right, in their minds than maybe I am. That I'm quiet, which may invite somebody to resist even approaching, because quiet says something about you to them that may be a total misread about who you are. Peace. Really, what's the biggest misconception people have about you?
That my voice is always effective.
That's deep. Right?
I think people read me as more serious than I actually am. I've been called the queen of stoicism. Yeah, by a peer in a like fun, friendly way. But people read me as sort of more serious and more sort of like studious. I am studious, right? But people read me as maybe not having a sense of humor and like not sort of being able to like have fun in those lighter moments, I think. And so that sometimes will create a barrier between myself and students, you know, at times. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Let's see if we can tap into the audience a little bit. So, do we have a microphone out there, or should I come out there and like do what I do? We'll share.
Oh.
Who has a question? You got one hand there. Let's go. Right up there. And one there.
Okay, great.
Please stand.
Dr. Parham, I just wanted to hear your answer to that question. What misconception do students have about you?
That sounds like what they asked James Brown when they say, "What you gonna play?" He said, "Bobby, I don't know." I think the biggest misconception I don't know. Well, and partly why that stumps me, so real talk here, that I always learned that irrespective of whatever scholarly ability you can highlight or clinical acumen, you gotta always keep it authentic and real. And so I try as best possible to be authentic. And so there's some people who relate to the authentic side of you, but don't understand the depth of your scholarship or your clinical acumen. There's some people who know you as the scholar and the teacher and the whatever, but don't know the authenticity of you. So that misperception is really more of a phenomenology of the individual because it relates to how they perceive me as opposed to that. And I've seen them on both ends of the spectrum. Great question.
Do you think you don't know because of your gender too? Because as women, we always think about what people think of us. And sometimes men can be a little removed from that experience.
I mean, possibly. But, interesting, one of the most important mentors in my life, in fact, has also been a woman. I mean, I've been blessed to have not only Joe White on the front side and Janet Helms as well, who's just phenomenal. Love Janet to death. Although you're talking about the misperception of a mentor, when I was a graduate student, I used to think Janet Helms did not like me. Now, as close as we are, all the writing we've done and stuff we've done and adventures we've had, and when she would critique, she was such a perfectionist in a good way, that she would critique and then correct her own corrections. I'm like, you just told me to correct this, and you're back. But I loved it because she was like what I call that queen mother that held you close until she thought you were ready to fly, right? And it's that kind of molding and cultivation that kind of did it. So, but maybe that's a possibility. Yeah. We had a question over here. And we can't see you behind the postal stand for me. There we go.
I'll just stand here so everybody can see me. I have a question for Dr. Cruz. This morning you were talking about spirituality and brought it up again here. And I struggle a lot to hold both my spirituality and my evidence-based psychology self in the same space. And I just wonder how you do that.
It's a good question. I separate it from religion.
Yeah.
In the way that I think about it personally. But when I'm working with a student or a client, I need to figure out what it means to them, right? So in terms of if I'm working with somebody, but within myself, like the scholarly side and the more human, just the personhood. To be honest, I don't have a big conflict with that, is the thing. I don't feel conflicted in my balance and reconciliation or integration of it's sort of like coexisting realities of science and art. Just like we learn a lot of science and backing of psychotherapy or education, but then there's an art to being with a person of trusting one's spirit or energy and history. I mean, it's like so many pieces that go into that. And everybody before us, so I don't have, I think that where it comes across where I have faced my entire career has been one of the hottest topics in our field, which is around religious diversity and holding that in respect, while also being respectful and affirming of gender and sexual minorities. I think that obviously is one of the biggest conflicts that we have at a very huge level that we cannot reconcile in the common culture and in our scholarly culture. And so I feel like that's the biggest one, and then women's reproductive rights is another one. So there's some, those are the pieces that I think impact that I challenge students sometimes on. So you believe all of the literature on anxiety, and you believe all of the literature on depression, and you believe all the literature in this, but when you read the literature on gender and sexual minorities are as well adjusted, 50 years of research, but you don't believe this research, right? So I think that's the main, if I bring it to content, that's the piece I struggle with the most.
Yeah, thanks.
Other questions? Let's go down here first, and then we'll go back there, and then down front.
Hi, I just had a question maybe for anyone on the panel. I was in a lot of spaces today where we had really great discussions about students' needs regarding, and mostly marginalized students with needs. And we had these great discussions, but it was like, well, we don't actually need to be the people who are talking about this. We need the faculty, we need the advisors, we need the mentors in the room with us. And I think I'm just curious what your thoughts on, engaging maybe more like privileged identity faculty members into those conversations.
Oh, hand me the mic. So let me say this one piece of part of understanding your privilege and your position in any institution that we occupy is about being able to assess, even at my level. Now, I'm a president of a university now. Something I never thought I'd do in my life. But even at that level, you always have to assess where are your allies and where are your alligators. Because they exist in every context. Don't think because you go up that you were there insulated. I almost had more juice as an assistant professor in the Ivy League at the University of Pennsylvania than I had as a senior administrator either at the University of California, Irvine, or even where I am now. And it just is contextual depending on the position. But the specific answer is that one of the things that I've done in kind of my bully pulpit is presidents get to have convocations every year. So in my convocation, my theme for this year was how do we better own student success? And owning success was not simply about, I talked about an analogy between renting and owning a car. Said if you rent a car, you don't put gas in it, you don't put tires, you don't blah, 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 you don't change the oil. You just rent it, leave it all dirty, sloppy, throw all kind of trash in it, whatever. I said, how many of you remember renting your students rather than owning the success of those students? And owning success means that you've got to be able to meet them where they are, help them grow in ways that are important to them, not making them clones of you, right? And so that's important. Well, I'm able to say that from that kind of pulpit, but also hold folk accountable so that if I don't see some very clear metrics about we are improving retention and graduation rates, we are doing this, then I have the power to hold faculty lines in a budget. I have the power to be able to, impact whether or not people get tenure promotion. I have the power to impact those things. So it's really inviting folk to be able to do it at that level. And so part of it is being able to, your power as students, and even as young assistant professors moving through the ranks, is in the ability to define and frame the discourse for those people like me who are in those kind of positions. And once we then know that that becomes an issue, given all the zillion things we have to manage, we can then use our own sense of privilege in those positions to be able to impact and do something good about that. Other folk, how would you respond?
I'll just add, I'm at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which is a Hispanic serving institution. So 80% or more of our undergraduate student populations self-identifies as Latinx. So there is an immense responsibility that we have. And I'm in the psychology department, which is the largest department. And so we have an immense responsibility to our students. But when we look at our undergraduate population, it doesn't look anywhere near what it looks like. It's predominantly white, rather, in our master's and our doctoral programs there. And so one of the things that I pointed out when I got there is, how do we have 80% Latinx students in our undergraduate population, and our master's and doctoral levels are completely white or mostly white? And so one of the things that I did was I got a fellowship to UPenn for the Minority Serving Institution Center there, which is focused on improving the mentorship of students at minority serving institutions, so HBCUs, ANAPESES, Hispanic serving institutions, and the like. And then I brought that information back to my colleagues, right? And so ultimately, just saying this probably wouldn't give a lot of weight to my argument, but because there's money and there's a center at UPenn, right? And so, some of that prestige that I'm lending to this argument comes from me being like, there's someone who paid for me to go for a week to learn about the needs of our students, right? And so I'm going to give you that information in this faculty meeting because it's important and people are putting a lot of money behind this. And so it's right. So as sometimes I don't feel like I have a lot of power as an assistant professor, but one of the things I can do is always bring this up in conversations when we're talking about interviewing doctoral candidates, when we're talking about interviewing people for our master's program. I want to make sure that our John Jay undergraduate student population is reflected in our master's and doctoral programs. And so I have the voice to be able to do that and make it, so we're going to the mid-year program office and saying your students need to apply for our doctoral program. We're going to prioritize their applications. And so it's important to just, bring it up as much as possible. And I think people are somewhat willing to listen. And sometimes they're just, and then they also, they're willing to listen, but I also think that the more that you bring it up, the less they can ignore the problem, right? And so many people are well-intentioned, but when you put action behind it, it's a little bit more difficult. But the more you can talk about it, I think the better. At least for myself, that's the method that I'm working from. Yeah.
In the interest of time, we'll try to go to a couple more questions. So you had one here, and we had one down front. Let's go to Sister Neat. All right. Okay, the bright lights are in the yellow hat? Right. I think you had a hand. It's coming. Stand for me if you would.
Hi, everybody. This question's for everybody on the panel, but I had a question to say, what was your pivotal moment in your psychology career that let you know that this was your passion?
I'm thinking of two things. One was I was going to be a PE teacher, and then I took a special ed class because I had done a lot of work with Special Olympics. And then they talked about testing, and I was like, who gives those tests? And they said, psychologists. I was like, okay, so that was number one. But my passion for diversity and university counseling and college mental health came from working in a prison, working in forensic psych, and feeling a shift of feeling very connected with the inmates and the clients, yet structurally and institutionally having to carry a gun, having to do certain things, and checking my CV for things that would be flagged, like LGBT research. I was like, this is obviously, so once I was in a university counseling service, it changed everything for me, and that's when I knew I needed to stay to increase all the voices, to have more voices.
For me, I was in a master's program in a counseling psychology, and I had never had any research experience, and I just didn't think that I was going to go in that route. And I came across research on racism and discrimination by Dr. Susanna Minlow. She was conducting research at the time, and that research changed everything. That's when I realized that I could actually be doing research on something that means to me, that means something to my community, that it wasn't like my undergraduate had only experimental labs, and so I saw was like rats and them learning how to press bars, and I just had a really skewed understanding of what research was. And when I watch those videos, people talking about their, this experience of racism, how they were being discriminated against, it just, that changed it for me. And that's when I kind of realized, oh, maybe like I want to do research. And then that opened the door to PhD, and here I am.
Let's keep going. Let's go.
I think it was for me when I was teaching multicultural counseling at the University of Utah, which is exactly how that sounds. It's a predominantly white institution. If you're going to talk about race at a PWI, you usually go in two directions. Either it fuels you and you're like, oh yes, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, or you say never again. And for me, it moved me in the direction of, let's do this. Yeah.
Let's go here. Let's keep on going. Stand home. Introduce yourself.
Thank you for this talk, and to give a little bit of context to my question, I'm from this city and I'm working now at a counseling center, a college counseling center in Southwest Virginia that I won't name because this is being recorded. But what I've experienced so far in my year of being there is that they are trying very hard to impact me with their culture. And I've been going along with it because I don't feel like I have the power to impact them. So I wanted to ask, you're all from different universities, different parts of the country. How have you been influenced by the cultures of your centers or universities, and how have you influenced those cultures?
So,
Are you at an internship?
I'm a licensed counselor. I'm not yeah.
So you worked there. My first year in grad school, first 2 weeks, we are in a personality course, Washington University in St. Louis, and I call that the Harvard of the Midwest, so-called. The assignment is you have 10-page paper due in a week. You have to write about your theory of personality. What's the right answer? There is none, whatever your theory is, right? Because they're trying to teach you how theories are constructed. Now, I'm trained by Joe White as an undergraduate at the University of California, and that's the father of black psychology. I get to WashU, 10-page paper. I think I write pretty well. The first 8.5 pages, I'm laying out kind of my theory, the constructs, whatever assumptions I make. The last page and a half, I'm critiquing the Eurocentric way in which theories are developed and why they may be less important for people like me who are culturally different and blah, 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 blah. I get the paper back, the second week, A-. Now I'm annoyed. And the rest of the students in my cohort are going, wow, that's cool. I'm like, no, it ain't cool. So, of course, I'm, like any of you, right? What I get wrong? So I go to the professor, and I open the paper up. The first 8.5 pages, great point, brilliant insight, blah, blah, blah. And the last page and a half, where I had all the cultural stuff, all kind of red marks, even to the point of what is this shit on a paper. Now, I got two choices. And I always learn, graduate school is not a democracy. Okay, what they tell you, it is not. Your goal is to get a degree, do that. So I got two choices. I can either correct the professor on the error of their ways in their class. Hear me? In their class. Because I think I know a little something about cultural stuff. Or I can just regurgitate what they want, because this stuff they're talking about we want to hear your voice and your theory, they ain't really serious about. Right? So what did I do? I buttoned my lip. Wrote what they wanted to write. What was my goal in that class? To get an A. What was my goal to get the degree? To get a master's degree. So I got the grade, got the class done, got the degree, went on to do my doctorate. Now institutions like that have to pay me a whole bunch of money to go back and say the same thing they didn't want to hear when I was a graduate student. So it doesn't change when you get to be, I'm a young assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania. I make an observation, silly me. Philadelphia, city 44% black. Now, I'm the first African-American academic psychologist, they tell me, University of Pennsylvania ever hired in its 200-something year history after it was founded by Ben Franklin back in 1776, actually. Now, I didn't know that before I got there. I found out after I got there. So I'm sitting in a faculty meeting one day with my colleagues, and I say, excuse me, somewhere I read in the APA manual that we should be careful about practicing outside of our scope of competence. We live in a city like Philadelphia that is 44% black, and we have no courses that we as faculty are teaching in either African American psychology or multicultural counseling. Anybody see anything wrong with that picture? So we need to think about developing a course and a curriculum that better trains the master's and the doctoral students we are training and turning out of here with our stamp on it to be more culturally confident. And I had faculty members mention to me, shh, that's not a way to make tenure. Now, the question wasn't, what was I willing to do? It was, what was I prepared to sacrifice? As a graduate student, I'm going to invite you to consider you should not be sacrificing your degrees. Get your degrees, right? And do what you need to do. But as a faculty member, and I don't know whether it's just you bold, you confident, you arrogant, I mean, I don't know what label applies. But I figured like I could always get another job, so I kept pushing. Now when you graduate from the University of Pennsylvania, you cannot graduate from that doctoral program without having a mandatory course in African American psychology. That's the one Howard Stevenson and them teach there, right, since I've been gone for all these years. That was, I don't know, 30 years ago, 30-something years ago. So you can always afford to do that, but the question was, what was I prepared to sacrifice? The elders and the ancestors didn't get us to this place, right? Because they did that. And I go to work every day, as I'm sure my colleagues do, trying to help answer this fundamental question, right? The great Algerian psychiatrist Frantz Fanon argued, he said, each generation out of relative obscurity must reach out and seek to fulfill its legacy or betray it. So whatever scholarly ability I think I have was made possible by the people who struggled and died long before I was even on the planet for me to even arrive at a place like Penn or the University of California or California State University, Dominguez Hills. I owe a debt. So at this point in my career, the question is not that people have a different idea than I do or they don't happen to like me or whatever. The question is if I give a damn about what they think in the first place. That's the problem. Right? But I can say that as a professional, I'm not willing to make that sacrifice that I couldn't say as a graduate student when I made a different choice to be able to finish the degree. So that's a long answer to your question, but I hope a thorough one. So. We have one more here. Let's go here. Oh, he has one in the back. I'm sorry. And then we'll get to you. We'll squeeze into it. You got to be quick, and then we'll take your questions, and then we'll answer them both. Go.
Okay. Yeah, so as a doctoral student, I'm really comfortable being a mentee, but one of my interests is mentoring younger students. But I feel like there's a lot of imposter syndrome that I get every time I think, like, oh, I'm not ready to be a mentor. So I was wondering if some of you could speak to how and when you first started feeling comfortable considering yourselves as mentors.
I still feel awkward calling myself a mentor. And part of it is because how I think about mentoring in general, that I think it's something that should come from mentees. So mentees should say, this is my mentor, because that's how they feel about the relationship. I would like to, I strive to mentor, but that shouldn't be coming from me. Because I'm not sure if I'm actually meeting their needs. I'm not sure. I hope I am. I ask a lot of questions because of that. And students are probably annoyed at me for asking a lot of questions, but I ask a lot of questions because I want to make sure, but I don't think I'm, so like I'm striving to, but I feel really kind of weird saying that, but I think we strive to do it.
So, student, how did you know you were ready?
am I even ready now? I don't know. I think very similarly, it still sometimes feels odd for me to call myself a mentor, but I also have to check, right, all the ways in which my socialization as a Black person, as a woman, have made me feel like I don't get to be a mentor, right? And so there are particular people who take that space and sort of hold it, like I am a mentor, right? And there are particular people who shy away from calling themselves mentors, and I think that's very much colored, right, for lack of a better word, by a lot of our social identities. So I think it's really important to reflect on how and why we get stuck not considering ourselves mentors when we have so much knowledge to impart. I mean, as a doctoral student, you've been through, I'm assuming, many courses, right? Many seminars, right, that impart you with knowledge that other people do not have, and so you have the ability to pass that on to others, and that's really all you need to be a mentor, and besides sort of an altruistic nature. And so I think sometimes we get stuck because of some of the ways in which we feel excluded from being able to sit in that role as mentor.
Yeah. And let me invite you to stand as I answer that question, because this is the last one, but please stand. But answer to your question, for me, I don't know that there's ever a time clock that any of us have had about when you decide you can be a mentor, whether you were an undergraduate student or graduate student. When I got picked by Joe White to be his teaching assistant as an undergrad, I started training and mentoring students even though I was a senior undergraduate student before I went to grad school. You never know. The answer to that for me has always been when someone else believes that you have something to give them, right? Rather than you deciding that you want to be a mentor. It really is in the mind of the individual who's seeking the counsel and guidance. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I feel so inspired. And my question kind of comes from this. As students and we're taking these steps forwards, how have you transformed these setbacks or painful experiences in mentorship or in your careers into this meaningful fuel that has brought you to this place today?
Let's use that as one of our closing thoughts. How have you transformed? So we started with Carmen. Let's start with Veronica.
Some of my peers at John Jay, we always talk about this idea like, oh, that's just another chapter in your autobiography, right? And so we oftentimes when something happens, right, or we're, on our text message chain at like 11 o'clock, like, can't believe that person said that in that meeting, we're like, oh, this is a good chapter for our autobiography, right? Because if you think about the idea of writing your life as a book, you're going to make meaning of those painful, difficult, traumatic experiences, right? And so I start to do that already in my mind immediately after something happens. Like, how will I write about this in a way that helps others to get through something similar? And so making meaning of difficult experiences is something that I do automatically. And so I think, I'm always thinking that I don't know that I'll ever write an autobiography, right? But if I did, I'd have a lot of chapters already, right? Just of those making meaning, right, is how we heal from experiences that are difficult. And so I'm always thinking about how do I make meaning? How do I share this experience with other people in not a way of just like passing on my trauma, but sort of helping them to deal with the next experience or barrier that they'll face.
I think ruptures in supervision are going to happen, in mentoring are going to happen. I think for me, taking some space. I think I'm socialized to try to fix everything right away. And if I feel that there is something to be fixed, I get into this either I make meaning of it or I try to fix it. I think what's really helped me is to take some space from it and return to it within myself when the pain has subsided.
One experience at a time, one step at a time is really a very simplistic way to think about it. But I think a deeper way that I think about it in this moment is that if I'm feeling this, other people have felt this. And if I'm having these experiences, even if we don't share all the identities, other humans feel this as well. And I wanted to impact that. I wanted to create spaces that felt safer for people, where they can emerge more authentically, and I want to be able to go to a classroom and, present myself as me, and then have a young undergraduate student say like, oh my God, this is a Latina psychologist, and I can do that too, because we didn't all have that, So I think for me that's what keeps my passion going.
Yuki?
I'm a very emotional person, so I gotta feel first. Take the time and feel. And that needs to subside a little bit in order for me to start kind of thinking. And, and then my thoughts will start kind of changing too. So like allowing that process to happen where like you just start digesting this stuff and it's okay that you start thinking and feeling differently, and allow that course of that whole thing to just kind of happen. And then, as Carmen was saying, like you just kind of get through it one thing at a time, but like allowing that process to happen. And sometimes it takes a while, so.
For me, I think it goes back to what I shared earlier about the notion of legacy, and that understanding that we have an opportunity to either fulfill or betray a legacy. I'm never far from, the context of what folk do. So oftentimes I'll invite my students, as I invite myself, to always contextualize struggle. I keep on my wall a picture of Malcolm X on one side and the ancestors in the slave dungeons on the other, because it always reminds me to contextualize struggle. And I believe if they can get through slave ships, then I can get through this. Brother Cornel West reminds us, he says, in life, right, there's a duality to your spirituality, to your energy and life force. And then in life, you will always have instances of unjustified suffering, unmerited pain, and undeserved harm. The question is never, does stuff happen to you? But rather, how do you sustain some movement and momentum in the face of whatever adversity you're going through? And so hopefully what you've heard from Carmen and from Yuki and from Riddy and from Veronica is that we've all been able to sustain some movement and momentum in the face of whatever adversity we have. But also we're always anxious to help students and professionals alike grow in ways that are important to them. So for all of my colleagues, we'll say thank you for being a part of this closing plenary. And we also want to ask you to join me in thanking the conveners of this winter roundtable for helping to sprinkle some salt water in a very freshwater world of cultural sterility in psychology and education. Thank you very much.